Another question, one question that we often hear, I'm just going to read a question that came in from one of our workshop participants because I think she
Yeah.
summarizes what we often hear. I am really bothered by the fact that we are a group of white people talking about how to be better white people and members of a community when more with more than white people without any feedback, input, or reflection of people from the community that are not just like us. It feels a bit arrogant that we think we can truly work towards being better friends and people like us by working through ideas with people just like us. While better than doing nothing, would it not be good to get feedback and input from the very groups of people we are saying we should better understand and appreciate? It feels like we are putting ourselves on the high pedestal that we are trying to knock ourselves off.
Whew, that's a good loaded question.
Mouthful.
Yes. So a couple things come to me. This participant is exactly right that we aren't going to be able to do the work authentically and with impact if we aren't understanding the perspectives and the lived experiences of those that our society is harming, given the hierarchy that is in place.
Right.
However, I think that there are important ways to go about doing that. So race affinity dialogues is something that you and I, Claire, facilitate often because there is a time and a place where white people need to be engaged in this work with just white people, and people of color need to be engaged in this work with just people of color. And there are many reasons for that. A couple of the main ones is there's just work that white folks have to do, and they need a space to do that that isn't going to cause harm to people of color. And I'd love to hear more of your perspective on that too in a minute. And then for people of color, particularly those of African descent, they need safe places to have dialogue that aren't places that are going to require that they prove their experiences or have to validate their experiences. So there's nothing inherently wrong with having white only spaces and people of African descent only spaces to talk about race equity work. So that's the first thought. And then the second thought I wanted to share to this is that there is a plethora of resources out there that we have at our disposal that are people of African descent and people of color sharing their experiences, sharing their perspectives of how to do this work. And by buying their book or subscribing to their workshop, you are compensating them for that burden, for that work that they do. And so oftentimes, when we're in these spaces and we talk about relationship building and needing to have perspectives of everybody, it is often done in a way that causes harm. It's, well, let's invite people of color to our space and ask them, you know, and that's not an appropriate way to gather experiences because number one, not all people of color want to be a spokesperson for people of color,
Right.
and number two, excuse me, and number two, how are we compensating them? You know, oftentimes there's this expectation that that people of color come to a space and it's safe for them to share their experiences, and we aren't thinking about ways that we should compensate them for that work.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts from your perspective, Claire?
Yeah, some other things that I've heard that I've had shared with me by some of my friends of color who have engaged in some of this work with me. I've heard things like we get tired of educating white people. We've this has been our lived experience from the day we were born, and
Mm-hmm.
what are the white people going to do with this? It's almost like there's this expectation that we're going to be spoon fed information that we need to go dig into and learn on our
Mm-hmm.
own. So I think part of it is just that recognition that white people we've got to do our own work in learning, in increasing our intercultural competence, in learning about our implicit biases, and and understanding what we need to own about how have we participated in systemic racism?
Mm,
How have we benefited from systems at the expense of other people? So there's some degree of work we need to do before we're really even equipped or fit to be in the room with a conversation with someone whose lived experience make this so very personal. You know,
yeah.
I can choose to engage in this conversation or not. A person of color lives in a world that's living the experience that we're talking about for 2 hours in our workshop. And so
Mm,
it takes my understanding is it takes a lot out of these people, and it's hard. It brings up past trauma that they're still carrying in their bodies. And so
mm,
um, to me it's like, yes, there's a place and time. We want to engage in conversations with people. We do need to hear perspectives. Let's start with building relationships. Let's start with that coming from another place. And in the meantime, let's do some of our own work. That's what I feel
yeah.
is
Well
just
said.
clearly important. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire.